So, good evening, everyone. I think I'm going to get started. Thanks for coming on this, foregoing the opening of the expo, the Montricher Expo, and coming here to this talk. That's very, very kind of you. Yeah, first let me say just thanks to Thomas and Chantal and the Michalski Foundation for inviting me and having me here, and Shadi for helping me with putting this presentation together, and my co-residents for being amazing. Okay, so this is a bit of a strange thing for me to do in the sense that I am going to present a project that is at its early stages. So basically I'm going to describe to you all a problem that is interesting to me and kind of sketch out the terrain that I'm starting from. And hopefully it will be interesting to you as well. And afterwards there'll be some time for questions, and then we'll have drinks upstairs. So that is the program. So yes, on the Silent Witness, the book of the Silent Witness, project earlier called Chasing the Sheikh, which is about a historical figure named Badr al-Habashi. So this is 12th century Muslim world, greater Mediterranean. Badr means full moon, and Habashi means Ethiopian, which might mean anywhere around the Horn of Africa. So this is what we know about Badr al-Habashi from his name. But mostly, in order to introduce him, I need to introduce, first of all, this orange juice stand in Morocco. So I need to introduce another figure who is Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi, who is known in the Muslim world as the Sheikh al-Akbar, or the greatest teacher. A hugely prolific, perhaps the most prolific writer in the history of the Arabic language, who is in some way my entry into this project, is my involvement in studying Ibn Arabi, his philosophy, theology, poetry. So the story begins with Ibn Arabi as a 15-year-old boy in Muslim Seville, the end of the 12th century. His father is a man named Ali, who is a functionary for the Almohad government. So this is the kind of fundamentalist Muslim Berber empire that has just spread from Fez, which is the capital, across Morocco, across the Mediterranean, and taken territory in Spain, which has been kind of, Islamic Spain has been kind of like unstable in the face of the advancing Christian armies from the north. So this is kind of the historical moment. And Ali is working for the government, trying to balance who he works for. Powers keep shifting. He's a man of the city, an elite intellectual of that time. His close friend is a figure named Ibn Rushd, who is known in the West as Averroes, who's like one of the great preservers and interpreters of the Greek philosophical tradition. He's one of the great interpreters of Aristotle. So this is kind of the milieu that this starts in. And Ibn Arabi is a 15-year-old boy, and he starts to kind of disappear into his bedroom for hours at a time and emerge shaken and pale and describing visions that he's had. And this happens repeatedly until his father starts to get concerned. So he goes to Ibn Rushd, his friend, and he kind of describes the situation. He's like, my son is having visions. I don't know what's going on. He's like, bring him to me. I'll talk to him. So Ali goes and gets Ibn Arabi out of his bedroom, brings him to his friend's house, and introduces them. And so Averroes looks at the 15-year-old Ibn Arabi and he asks him if what he has seen in his visions, does it agree with what Averroes has deduced through logic and his philosophy? And Ibn Arabi thinks about it and says, yes. And so Ibn Rushd is very relieved. He moves to embrace the young man. And as that happens, Ibn Arabi starts to feel misunderstood and recoils and steps back and says, no. And so then Averroes is like, well, what is it? Is it yes or is it no? And he says, yes and no, but the space between the yes and the no divides spirit from matter and birds' heads from their bodies. So this is kind of the beginning of Ibn Arabi's career in a way. So he will then go on and prove to be a very idiosyncratic person, very brilliant, immediately memorizes the Quran, reading huge books of the hadith, stories about the life of the Prophet, and classic works of theology and philosophy, al-Ghazali, all these things. At the same time, he is wandering around Seville. He is hanging out with a woman who collects scraps from in front of the houses of families that have left behind, that have left trash out, and feeds herself in that way and hangs out in the graveyard. This becomes his close friend. So he's kind of in some way at the margins of society and also a prodigy. And so he eventually leaves Seville and he goes to Fez, which is at that point the capital of the Almohad Empire. So this is where the Qarawiyyin University is. It's the main university of the Islamic world. It's still existing and is the oldest continuously existing university in the world. So Ibn Arabi goes there where scholars and intellectuals are concentrated, but he's somewhat controversial. He says a lot of crazy things. He's always having visions. People are a little suspicious of him. So he doesn't go to the university. He goes to, this is me trying to find it in Fez in January. So he goes to a little mosque that looks like this, called Ain al-Khayl, which is just in the neighborhood, kind of at the edge of town, and he sets himself up in this mosque, and he starts to lead prayers. And it's basically just people coming from the neighborhood. Sometimes people come, they've heard about this, visiting intellectual from Andalusia, but basically it's a small community. It's a very small mosque. And at some point, Ibn Arabi is leading prayers, so he is facing the prayer niche, basically facing the wall, which is oriented towards Mecca, and behind him are the community of believers who are going through the movements of prayer. And at some point in the middle of this, his regular vision falls away, and he sees himself as if from above, and he's able to see this entire room full of people moving in unison. And he notices a person that he had not seen before, a little bit darker skinned than the average people that gather there, a little bit older than him, and feels a sense of recognition. After those prayers, the two of them talk, and this is Badr al-Habashi. So Badr tells him he has been enslaved by a family called Harani, and who are from Syria, living in Alexandria in Egypt, and they had gone on the hajj and taken Badr with them as the family servant. He had performed the hajj, the ritual, and at some point had gone to sleep and had a dream, and in his dream he heard a voice that said, "You must leave this family by any means necessary, go to Fez." So somehow, and we don't know how, the family freed him. He refers to himself always as a freed slave of the Harani family. May God forgive them. And made his way to Fez, where he had heard about Ibn Arabi. He was drawn to this mosque. The two of them met after this strange prayer. They formed a kind of bond, and they traveled together for 23 years until Badr died. So soon after they meet, Ibn Arabi takes Badr with him back to Andalusia. So they go back to Seville, and Ibn Arabi starts to introduce him to his different teachers. So among his teachers is a drain pipe. There's lots of mysteries about this. This older woman that he refers to as the leper's widow, who gathers scraps in front of houses, and he says she has a face so rosy that you feel embarrassed to look at her. And this is one of his teachers. There was a man who, through sheer power of concentration, was able to fill the bellies of the hungry until they would belch. And so he takes him around to introduce him to these people. One of them is a man he refers to as the secret pillar. So it's Ibn Jadun, who is a henna collector. So this is how Ibn Arabi describes him. He says, when he was absent, he wasn't missed, and when he was present, no one sought his advice. When he arrived in a place, he was accorded no welcome, and in conversation, he was passed over and ignored. If he spoke, he appeared foolish. When he sat down, others began to get up and leave, and when he was present in a company, others found his presence tiresome. This state of affairs was pleasing to him. So at some point, Ibn Jadun revealed to Ibn Arabi, this was all a little bit different than it might appear. And in that way, he became a teacher. So this is the world that these two are traveling in. So they go back to Morocco, and from there, they travel east. So this is the Idrisi map, some map of the period. So you might think that rock here on the left, but it is on the other, because the map is upside down. You can see Spain, the Arabian. So they set off from Morocco. East, they start in Algeria. They get to Cairo, hajj, make with a bunch of people. Then plague, and everybody's two of them end up sneaking out by themselves. They go to Jerusalem, and they make their way to Mecca. And so, already been to Mecca, making the hajj, but Arabi 30s, around, Muslim, devoted scholar. This is the period of religious life. So he enters this meant to house the home of God. Wronged with regulations, circle, and Arabi enters, and he feels over. He's a stone, and into nerve, like this. In the corner of his eye, he feels, and catches his eye as well. He moves towards him. He describes this encounter as symbols, paradoxes, expressed what he's going through. He embraces him, and the young man says, "Turn around and look." He gets up. All of a sudden, it's lack of what sets the universe. And he says he longs to be a hair will of the pen, person writing has created this. All this changed, the meaning is flooding in to the young man, and the young man who's his clothes, Ibn Arabi lays his head against his bare weep. At some point, he pulls his head back. He's the skin of the youth is covered in scar, and he reads on the body of the young life the secrets of the subtle reality of what's happening. And he's and I wonder if maybe the brain pipe that is his teacher. But so he goes back, he rejoins with Badr. They continue on their travels. They go to Baghdad, Mosul, Damascus, Aleppo, and all the while, Ibn Arabi is writing furiously. You know, he's writing thousands of pages of this book that becomes called the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, the Meccan openings, where he's trying to write down what he saw written on the flesh of the young man. And so often they stop in the evenings and they read. And along the way, he's writing other books and other small pieces, but the main thing he's writing is this ever-expanding, maniacal work that is a unique, bizarre piece of writing. So then they would sit and read the manuscripts, and as people would listen, they would sit in the evening and there would be 6 or 7 people. They would read out this passage from the manuscript, and then the people who were there would sign it. So they're like, it's April 2nd in Mauritius. Here we are, da 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 da. Everybody signs the manuscript. So the manuscripts start to gain a history of presence and listening. And so through that, you can track the movements of where they were. And often you have Badr's name among these lists. Here, for example. So you can find the presence of these two as they move around the region. Eventually they get to Malatya in the south of Turkey, where they've been invited by the Seljuk Sultan because they met an advisor in Mecca. And while they're there, Badr dies. So this is after 23 years of traveling together. They bury him. There's a man naturally appears, having had a dream where he was instructed to prepare himself to wash a corpse. And so as Ibn Arabi is preparing to wash the corpse of his companion, this man appears. And so Ibn Arabi steps away and lets the other man wash Badr's body. And so what remains of Badr is mostly just these signatures. However, there was a time when he took a stack of paper and he wrote down a handful of phrases that Ibn Arabi had said, but that were not included in his work. So there's like a few of these phrases that there's a manuscript that is attributed to Badr. But mostly what you have of him is as the companion to Ibn Arabi, whose works are written to him. So the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, this 27-volume, tens of thousands of manuscript pages, this work is dedicated to Badr. There's other books that he wrote along the way that are dedicated to him. So, so just to give a kind of a sense of what Ibn Arabi's kind of more theological, this is, in English obviously, but just to get a sense of what it's like. So when Ibn Arabi was in Cordoba, in the Great Mosque, he had a vision of all of the prophets in history. So from Adam to Muhammad, they were all gathered together. And one prophet, Hud, turned to face him and he said, "None among creation are not led by the forelock, for my Lord is on a straight path." And so Ibn Arabi just starts to riff on this phrase. And so this is just the beginning of something that will go on for many pages. So, "None among creation are not led by the forelock, for my Lord is on a straight path. So all progress occurs along the straight path of the Lord. In that sense, none incur wrath, nor do they stray. For just as their straying is accidental, so wrath is only an accident. In the end, it meets a mercy that encompasses everything, and which preceded it. All but truth are creatures endowed with spirit. So whatever slithers along by itself is in fact driven to slither by something else. It slithers according to the laws of nature, and so is on the straight path. And it would not be a path but for those traveling it. And this goes on and on and on. So this then becomes a practice. People gather in groups and read these dense theological passages. So Ibn Arabi's students eventually take his manuscripts to Konya in Turkey, and he's kind of adopted by the Ottoman elite, and the schools of the madrasas of the Ottoman Empire are founded by students of Ibn Arabi. But there's nothing in the West, there's nothing left behind in Andalusia. So when all of the translations like Ibn Rushd and all of the Greek classics that were held in Arabic and then translated into Latin, when all this work would happen that would lead to Aquinas, that would be lay the foundation of the Renaissance, Ibn Arabi was excluded from any of that process of translation. So his work was really only read in Persian in Ottoman spheres, and even that way only in a very particular way. So it wasn't kind of until the 20th century when it started to be included in the intellectual history of the West, for lack of a better word. So that's now happening, and which is interesting in its own way. And as I've been interested in this stuff, somehow I was more and more drawn to this figure of Badr al-Habashi, who is, the witness to what's going on. And it seems to me that somehow the babbling maniac who's writing hundreds and thousands of pages, somehow the one who remains silent is of superior intelligence, let's say. So I felt like it made sense to spend some time paying attention to Badr. So that has been kind of the seed of this project, which is not about writing a historical novel or trying to fictionalize these people. It's more just taking the non-stop speaker and the silent listener as a kind of riddle, and to see what can be done with that. So I've been looking at different things. First of all, there's a Saudi doctor named Muhammad Alwan who recently wrote a biography of Ibn Arabi, fictional. So I just went through it and I pulled out the references to Badr that are in the novel. So you have, Badr is buying supplies. He's fixing a door latch. Badr is serving hot bread and fresh dates for breakfast. Badr is arriving, and that was a sign to travel. You have become a part of my heart. You are my resolve, Badr. You choose, we'll head there. Badr thought a little and said, Damascus. In Damascus he slept on silk pillows, the softest he'd ever known. Toward the end of the book, Badr remembers being in a group of people surrounding a fortune teller who read everyone's fortune, then turned to Badr, but he said he didn't want his fortune told. He wanted to know where his mother is. When he died, Ibn Arabi called out, who am I to bury someone like Badr? So this is just to distill from 400 pages the only references to this companion of 23 years. And then I started to look at people who have been interested in the silences and the margins of archives. So the classic example for me is Saidiya Hartman, who is writing about women who are being trafficked across the Middle Passage, so taken from Africa to the Americas during the transatlantic slave trade, where the only record of many of these women is the way that they might appear in the reports of their torturers, imprisoners, and traffickers. So then the question becomes how to try to give life to these women where that is the only record that you have of them. So she has these lines, to read the archive is to enter a mortuary. Was it better to leave them as I found them? She asks because she wonders if to make these women signify again is like asking them to work. And this passage has been provocative to me. So, narrative restraint, the refusal to fill in gaps and provide closure, the imperative to respect black noise, the shrieks, the moans, the nonsense, and the opacity, which are always in excess of legibility and of the law, and which hint at and embody aspirations that are wildly utopian, derelict to capitalism, and antithetical to its attendant discourse of man. And then finally, another step in this thinking is Imam Marsal, who is a wonderful poet from Cairo, who's around 60 years old now. So at some point she was going through old newspaper clippings in Cairo, and she found a death notice of a female writer from the 60s that she'd never heard of. And so she was curious, because there's not that many women writers from Egypt in that generation. And so she started to look into it, and she found that this woman had written one book and then committed suicide. She had worked for a time in the television station, but because the television station had so few tapes, they constantly taped over what they were broadcasting, which meant there was nothing left of any of her appearances, and all of the correspondence between her and her editor had been lost. So it starts off on this kind of circuitous path, trying to see what she can recover of this woman. And finally, at some point in the book, she has this paragraph where she's talking about a jin's jami, which, something like a hodgepodge. And she says, "Let us make something extraordinary together, something like the classical Arabic biographers whose authors would wander at whim from the subject at hand, digressing as they pleased. Say a person's name reminds them of a given tribe, then write about that tribe, then offer a few lines of famous poetry written in praise of that tribe's great figures before returning to their main account when they are promptly reminded of a favorite proverb. So on to the story of how that proverb came about, no sooner back on track, but back to the person they should be writing about, then an echo is touched off, another remembrance, and so on." So this becomes a catch-all for every literary form and approach, allowing mujansa, which is to say coexistence. And I felt like this was, in a way, describing my favorite literary form, which is this loose hybrid thing that can swallow everything, which I feel like is a unique power of the novel in a way. But there are wonderful examples in the history of Arabic nonfiction, which I've been looking at, which are wonderful. So before coming here, I was on a residency in Fez in Morocco, where I was going to the mosque where this meeting had happened, and working on my Arabic, other things. And at some point, a language student gave me this book called Tuhami, which is by an American ethnographer named Vincent Craponzano. They say that you can teach the entire history of anthropology only using American studies of Morocco. Somehow American seems to be obsessed with Morocco. But so Craponzano supposedly interviews a corpse washer from Meknes, which is like an hour from Fez. And this is what he says: "When the world has been destroyed, God will ask the angel of death to look around to see if anyone yet lives. Sperm will rain on the earth, the dead will grow from the earth up to their navels and remain stuck this way until the angel of death at last sneezes." And so I was thinking about this sneezing of the angel of death as a particular image and moment and thing to base your worldview on. And so this took me back, in the sense, all of this investigation of the nonstop writer and the silent listener, the babbler and the ear, for me, in a way, comes from this early theological controversy between apophasis and kataphasis. So apophasis is speaking against, kataphasis is speaking emphatically. So one of them is saying God is indescribable, unknowable, beyond being, beyond any denial. It can only be invoked through negation. And kataphasis is saying God is the little blue flowers arising in the forest right now. God is the Montrichet Expo. God is sunlight on the lips of my mother. So both of them are these endless invocations of names that can never achieve what they are being disposed to. So language becomes like a practice instead of a description. And so one of the kind of emblematic controversies is between these two figures, Porphyry and Iamblichus. So these are both Greek-speaking intellectuals from like the 1st or 2nd century. Porphyry is from the coast of Lebanon, and Iamblichus is from Syria, kind of nearby. Porphyry goes to study in Athens and Rome, finally, where he becomes a student of Plotinus. Iamblichus stays in Syria. So both of them come from this milieu of a kind of like Semitic-speaking pagan society where people are visiting graves, they're making circles of stones, they're burning herbs, and they are reciting series of syllables that they don't know what they mean. So they're called the onomata barbara, which means the barbarian names. So they're like nonsense syllables that they're saying, repeating abracadabra, abracadabra, and that this is a way that they practice their religion. And so Porphyry is saying, this is backwards. This needs to be stopped. This is some hayseed, dumb country practice. And he's very dismissive. Where Iamblichus is saying, you only think that you only criticize this because you think you understand it. Where actually the fact of not understanding is what gives power to these formulas. And so the invocation of what can't be named comes through these nonsense syllables. And so he writes this defense of the barbarian names. And so with this in mind, I couldn't help but think how I had just come from the Qarawiyyin University in Fez, the oldest still operating university, to Switzerland, which is the home of Dada. And so I was looking, just very briefly, being like, looking into my favorite Dada things. And of course, right away we get the Karawan. So from Qarawiyyin to Karawan, we get Hugo Ball writing this, Jolifanto Bamla Fali Bamla Grosigam Fa Habla Horem Egiga Goram. And so it's still this belief that nonsense is what has power. And so this is more or less where I have gotten to. So I've been filling notebooks with basically experiments that are going here and there from these starting points. So I've written 2 novels and 2 nonfiction books, and somehow I feel like, I don't know, I feel like setting a sail on a project that I don't know what it is or where it will go. So thanks for listening. Thanks for your patience and indulgence with these pretty esoteric topics. And I don't know if anybody has questions. I'm happy to do my best to answer. We'll also have drinks upstairs, so we can also talk upstairs. But just let me know if I have. What about your Arabic now? How's my Arabic? It's getting it. Oh yeah, sorry. You want to speak in just for the recording, I guess they yeah.
So what about your Arabic?
I mean, my Arabic is getting better. I feel like for me, Arabic is like a lifelong process of self-torture that I feel compelled to continue with. I was thinking about it this morning, that it's a little bit like I get these pages and I study them and I look for the subject and the object and the adjectives and the adverbs and the words that I know, and I make sense of it as much as I can, and then I look up the words that I don't know, and all of a sudden this thing comes into focus and I can understand it. And it's very amazing, and I kind of like move through the text in that way, and sometimes I translate passages, and then I go back and look at it a week later, and I've like kind of forgotten half of the words again, and it's a little bit like these kind of chambers and corridors which like open and come into focus and then disappear. So Arabic is a little bit like that. Yeah.
Before I forget, I just wanted to ask you if you thought that this nonsense language or anything has any parallels to the southern U.S. Christian tradition of speaking in tongues?
I mean, I definitely have no authority to speak on that, but I mean, but I'm going to make something up, and you can decide whether you believe me. From the Islamic community in Morocco, that intellectual center moves to Timbuktu, and then from the community around Timbuktu, there's a lot of people that are kidnapped and trafficked to the U.S. So you get these communities on the Sea Islands in Georgia, where people are prayed to the east, and they write prayers on pieces of paper and bury them in the edge of the garden. And there's a lot of practices that come from that lineage that can be identified. And the person who, I don't know this history very well, but I know that the person who founded the Pentecostal church in the U.S. had been enslaved, was a black American. And so I know one guy that I encountered many years ago in the Balkans who was a white American who comes from that community, had been trained to be a missionary, and had been sent to Ghana to preach and to convert people. And in the middle of preaching and leading a ceremony, he realized that he was just teaching people their own stuff. And he had like a moment of crisis, and he got down off of wherever he was standing, and he abandoned his practice. He gave up being a missionary, and he left the church. So all of that is to say that these kinds of practices that were circling the Mediterranean at that time, you can draw a line in some way to how that gets to the American South across the Black Atlantic. Any other questions? All right. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Do you think that your work could be more than a book, like something more performative?
Well, based on tonight's performance, I don't know. But I don't know. It hasn't occurred to me. I've never been somebody who's doing performances, but you never know. You know, I could be moving further into things that I don't know. Okay. Unless there's any last questions, then let's go upstairs and have a drink.